Now, kids have probably gone back to your families, but you might have worked a little bit at some point on memorizing this psalm, or maybe moms or dads have memorized it, or maybe sometimes we've just heard it so often that we almost know it by heart. This is Psalm 23, and sometimes we do our psalms back and forth, but this one's so good, I don't want to keep any of the words for myself. I want everyone to get to read them. So together in unison, we'll read Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Be not afraid, sing out for joy, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Be not afraid, sing out for joy, Christ is risen, hallelujah. The Holy Gospel according to John. Very truly, I tell you, Jesus said, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. So one of the things that caught me this week as I was reading a commentary by Professor Bob Smith, one of my New Testament professors and one of the just wonderful, excellent Bible scholars that we have had the privilege of having in our faith tradition in the ELCA. His commentary on John catches on this line right there at the beginning. Anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way. And the idea of behind that language, he says, is ascend, is to go up. And the thing is, for John, the writer of this gospel, he's writing the whole thing with the end in sight. He has already a sense of what he understands about who Jesus is and what he means for us. And his whole gospel is pointing to the point where Jesus is going to be lifted up into his glory. And the punchline for that, and for all of us who think we know what glory should look like and what being ascending into the role of leadership and power ought to look like, the punchline is that to be lifted up into his glory is to be crucified, is to give of his life, to give of his love, to commit to being with God's people so fully that he will go into death ahead of us, with us, alongside us, so that there's nothing that can separate us. And so this idea of ascending and climbing in, there's a right way to ascend and a wrong way to ascend in the Gospel of John. And this idea of folks who would like to ascend, to climb in, to get into a position of authority over the sheep by any way that is not the self-giving love of God on the cross, it's no good. There is only one way to abundant life, Jesus says, and it's through his self-giving love, right? So there's first this note about the shepherds that want to climb up. And we know in our own lives and in our own worlds, in Jesus' world, he was reacting to and responding to the story that happened just before this in the 9th chapter of John. We had it in Lent, where a blind man, Jesus heals a man who was born blind, and he's able to see again. And there is a great kerfluffle among the religious authorities because somebody is doing something that shouldn't be done, and whose authority and who's got power, and why is this man claiming that there are miracles being done? And what's interesting in that story, I remember Pastor Tim noting that this man had never seen Jesus, right? He's given these instructions and healed, and then Jesus says, go. And the man doesn't see Jesus until later, but he recognizes his voice. He's heard his voice. He knows love and care and life when he hears it. And the religious authorities are so busy arguing about whether or not Jesus has the authority to give life that they miss the gift. They have climbed up by some other way is sort of the implication. Or some folks would read this and say, well, really, it's the power of the empire that is the great example of folks who have climbed up by another way. The metaphor of shepherd is an image of kingship or rule, both in the Jewish tradition and in the secular Greek and Roman world around them, or not secular, but the Gentile Greek and Roman world around them. And this is a judgment on those who are in power and how they operate. What they really want, Jesus says, is not to serve or nurture the flock, but to profit from it. Right? Rome comes and extracts value and brings that back to the empire and leaves the little guys marched all over, kind of under their feet. And the kings of Israel have a spotty track record, more often than not, serving their own needs and interests rather than nurturing the flock. There's any number of folks that want to shepherd us, or there are any number of times we think we ought to be the shepherd. We ought to be the ones who can decide how things are done. And if we are not there to serve and nurture the flock, we are thieves and bandits. So that caught my eye. How is the shepherding, the leader, ascending? Where is their authority derived from? And in John, the good news is that Jesus' authority, Jesus' glory, Jesus' power is all revealed in the self-giving love. Jesus says, the sheep know his voice, right? We know love when we hear it. We know when someone just wants something. And it's not that Jesus doesn't ask something of us. As we get a little farther into this, we'll see he asks quite a bit, but it is not for his own gain. So we know the voice, like that blind man who heard Jesus before he could even see him. He knew what Jesus sounded like. We've heard Jesus speak our names in our baptisms. Maybe you saw, if you gathered with us while we were still waiting, or you clicked on a link that had a thumbnail, we used the picture of our banner. I have called you by name, you are mine, this image of the shepherd and all our little baby lambs that have been baptized. Your name was spoken in your baptism. Your name is known by God. And you know, when you hear your name, what kind of tone of voice is being spoken, right? You know, whether my children know, certainly I imagine, when they hear their names, if it is a cheerful invitation from mom, or if it is a you didn't empty the dishwasher the third time I asked you, sort of a call your name thing, right? I certainly knew when I was young which version of my name was being used. We know Jesus' voice, and we can tell the difference. Being home during these stay-at-home times, I have more occasion to answer the telephone than usual. I know when it rings 9 times, probably more like 95 times out of 100, it's not anyone real on the other end. But because it's a local number, because we don't know who's having might need to get a hold of the pastor, I tend to answer it and just in case. And the worst are those where it's a recording and they're trying to, with the timing of the recording, sound like a real person. Oh, it just galls me. And maybe you've had that experience. They're trying to simulate real conversation, but it only takes half a beat to know that it's wrong, right? We are smart. Even on Zoom, as we do meetings and gatherings and Bible studies, you'll find articles that say Zoom fatigue is real because the small cues that we use to know when one person's done speaking, when somebody's telling the truth, or whether they're being a little shifty, are they making eye contact? None of those things are quite right on Zoom. They're close. It's sure better than nothing, but they're not quite right. And our subconscious has to work really hard and is just a little unnerved. My kid's favorite phrase is the uncanny valley, when something is very close to how your mind should expect it to be, but it's just off a little bit. And this isn't artificial intelligence, but even real people through this filter sound a little off. We know when someone's trying to simulate the real thing. And Jesus is the real thing. Now, I said before that those false shepherds, they want something from us. They want to profit. But it's not that Jesus has nothing in mind for us. We did not read earlier our Acts reading for today, but in the season of Easter, the first reading is usually taken from the book of Acts. And it's pulling pieces of the story of the early Christian community, trying to figure out how to be. How are we called to live if Jesus is raised from the dead and the Holy Spirit is given to us? And so one of the things that we might want to remember is that sheep come in groups. Sheep are generally considered to be held in a flock. You can have one, but when Jesus is talking, he's talking about a flock. We love Psalm 23 and this beautiful relationship that I'm the sheep and Jesus tends to me and the Lord tends to me, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's only a part of the picture. Because in fact, it's not me and Jesus. It's never been me and Jesus. It's always Jesus and the community. So sheep come in a community. And here in the second chapter of Acts, we pick up after the Holy Spirit has come. Peter has made quite a speech. And here in verse 41, those who welcomed Peter's message were baptized. And that day, about 3,000 persons were added. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. They gathered together. More and more were added. Again and again, there's this sense of sharing and generosity and responding to the needs of others. I heard a really wonderful line this week from Kate Bowler, who is a Christian historian. She's got a beautiful book and podcast called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved, as she deals with stage 4 cancer and how she responds to that. But one of the beautiful things she had in a little video was the line, "We are not meant to be a standalone project. We were always a group project." We are not meant to be a standalone project. We were always a group project. We are always called into community. Whether we can physically gather in a church building right now or not, we know that it is a community we're called into and that we have responsibilities toward our neighbor. Jesus says he comes that we might have abundant life. It's interesting, as he says, "I am the gate." I think of gated communities. And I confess that I get a little twitchy when I think of gated communities because they very clearly send a sign that some folks are in and some folks are out. And I think it's very tempting for us to hear, "I am the gate, therefore we have gone through the right door and we're right, and now we're all in and we're safe, and too bad for you out there, you got it wrong." But what Jesus says, "I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, will come in and go out." There's this sense that the sheepfold is not some sort of walled off fortress. There are times that we gather in there, and there are times when we go out, and we are coming and going and coming and going. The gate is Jesus, that self-giving love. If it doesn't look like the self-giving love of God, it's not going to lead to life. And if it leads to life, it's a part of the self-giving love of God. And the thing is, when you go in and out that gate, you're supposed to be reshaped. We are supposed to be reshaped into people like those disciples there in the book of Acts who are suddenly more able to give away that abundant life because we know it doesn't run out. We know that there is more than enough of God's love and God's mercy and God's grace for us and for all of the sheep that God knows. Curly-haired, sticks in their wool, you name it. And so when you think about Jesus as the gate, you think about Jesus as the shepherd, remember that Jesus is not trying to say, I don't think, my way or the highway. He's saying, here's the good stuff. Here is life. Don't let someone else try to take it when it's given freely for you. Come and receive it, and then come and give it. Thanks be to God.